Hey guys, just a quick thank you to all of you amazing legends that are subscribed. I could not have done it without you. But most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and like this video. It's free and it really helps our small team out. I matched with this girl on Tinder, and honestly, at first, I thought it was too good to be true. Her name was Emily, and she was gorgeous. Like, she had one of those smiles that looked like it belonged in a perfume ad or something. Her profile was super chill too. No weird bio, just something like sick of the fake stuff, just looking for something real. She had a few photos, one with her by the beach, another with her at a concert, and a cute one with a dog that looked like it belonged to a millionaire. It was all very perfect, but I didn't think too much of it. I figured maybe she was one of those Instagram perfect types, but whatever. We all post our highlights, right? We started chatting, and it didn't take long before I was hooked. She was funny, down to earth, and she kept saying she was looking for something real, not just some hookup or whatever. Like she hated fake people. She was super passionate about it. And I don't know, maybe it was the way she spoke or something, but I really bought into it. We talked for hours about anything and everything, our favorite movies, stupid childhood memories, what we wanted to do with our lives. She didn't seem like the type to ghost, and she made me feel like I was the only one she was talking to. I mean, she told me she hated playing games. So I thought it was all legit. After about 2 weeks of texting, we finally agreed to meet up. I was nervous, sure, but also excited. We picked a cozy little cafe in the city. Not too fancy, just a chill place with good coffee. I showed up early because I didn't want to look like an idiot walking in late, and I'm glad I did. I sat down, got my drink, and waited for her. I kept checking my phone to make sure I wasn't getting catfished or something. I know it's dumb, but part of me was a little paranoid. Time passed, and I kept checking the door, looking for some girl who looked like she stepped out of a magazine. But after what felt like 15 minutes, I started getting a weird feeling. Something wasn't right. The door swung open and I saw a guy walk in. He was around my age, average height, wearing a hoodie and jeans. He looked like he'd just gotten out of bed. He saw me looking and waved awkwardly, and of stumbling over to my table. Hey, you're Jason, right? I stood up, confused. Yeah, I'm Jason. Are you, Emily? I asked, glancing around, thinking maybe she was running late. He shook his head and smiled weirdly. No, no. I'm Emily's brother. He said it like it was supposed to make sense, but it didn't. She's a bit shy, so I thought I'd come meet you first. She's actually on her way, just, she wanted me to check you out before she comes over. I kind of froze. It felt off, but I wasn't sure if I was overthinking it. He sat down without asking, and I just went along with it because I didn't know what else to do. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through it like we were already friends or something. I'll show you some pictures of Emily. I mean, you must have seen her profile already, but these are from her other accounts, he said, holding up his phone and showing me a bunch of photos of her. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I realized the accounts weren't just on Tinder. There were Instagram profiles, Facebook pages, even some older stuff from MySpace or whatever. Some of them had different names. And there were a couple of pics that didn't look like the same girl at all. One had her wearing glasses and a messy bun, and another was of a completely different girl with the same name. I tried to process it, but my brain couldn't catch up. I felt a cold pit in my stomach, but he didn't seem to notice. He was rambling on like it was no big deal, saying how it's just fun to mess with people who are too trusting. Like, people fall for it, They think they're talking to one person, but it's me the whole time. Sometimes I just make up whole personalities for them. It's hilarious, he said. I started feeling like I was gonna pass out. My mind was racing and my stomach was churning. I could barely focus on what he was saying. He kept scrolling, showing me more photos, all of them of her or some version of her. The one thing that stood out was the names and dates on the accounts. They were all linked to the same date, like every one of them was created within days of each other. I kept trying to make sense of it. Maybe she had a really strange sense of humor or something. But then he pulled up a video, and that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. It was a grainy video from a night out showing a girl who looked just like Emily, but there was something off. The way she was acting, the things she was saying. She was standing next to another guy, someone who looked like he might have been in on it too. They were laughing, but it was the kind of laugh that made my skin crawl. The girl in the video wasn't Emily. It was a different face altogether. I didn't know who it was, but it definitely wasn't her. I stood up, feeling like my chest was closing in. I didn't say anything, just grabbed my jacket and started heading for the door. I could hear him behind me calling after me, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around. My heart was pounding so hard in my ears, it was like I was underwater. I left that cafe and blocked him on everything: Tinder, Instagram, even Facebook. I didn't tell anyone what happened because I wasn't sure what to say. What was there to say? This guy was messing with people's heads for fun. But the worst part was the feeling that he wasn't alone. I kept imagining how many other people he'd done this to, how many others had been fooled by this same girl, or Emily, or whatever her name was. I don't know if I'll ever really know what the deal was with her. Maybe she was real, maybe she wasn't. But that day, sitting there, I realized just how easy it is to be duped by someone who knows exactly how to play on your trust. And the thing that really freaks me out, I still don't know who the hell Emily was. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened, but I can't get it out of my mind. Honestly, part of me doesn't want to tell anyone, but I feel like it's something I have to talk about just in case it happens to someone else. I met Ned on Hinge. His profile was all charm and good vibes. His pictures were normal, nothing too over the top. Just a guy who looked like he had his life together, smiling in some coffee shop, hiking the mountains, and hanging with a group of friends. He didn't do the whole look at me with my shirt off thing like some other guys. He seemed kind of real. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed easily. He had a quick wit, was funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about everything: movies, music, childhood memories. The kind of stuff you talk about when you're trying to figure out if someone's worth your time. And I don't know, it was nice. It wasn't like all those other weird Tinder convos where the guy starts out with something creepy like, "Hey, wanna send me some pics?" or whatever. This felt different. After a few days of texting, he asked me if I wanted to meet up for dinner. It was a pretty casual suggestion, nothing too fancy. So I agreed, and we set the date for Friday night. I got to the restaurant first, which I hate doing, but I wanted to make a good impression, so I found a booth and waited. When he walked in, I almost had to double take. He looked even better in person than his pictures, which, yeah, I know it sounds cliche, but it's true. He was taller than I expected, wearing this button-up shirt that fit just right, and his hair was perfectly messy in that way that only guys who know try too hard can pull off. He had this easy smile, the kind that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We sat down, and everything seemed fine at first. We talked about the usual stuff: work, what we like to do in our free time, all that. But as the night went on, I started noticing little things that made my stomach twist. For example, he asked me if I still had my childhood pet, a cat named Mr. Whiskers. And I froze, like my heart literally stopped for a second. I never told him that. I hadn't even posted about Mr. Whiskers in years, so I played it cool, laughed it off like it was no big deal, but inside I was starting to freak out a little. Then he casually mentioned that he loved the book The Catcher in the Rye, and I'm sitting there thinking, wait, no one talks about that book anymore. That was my absolute favorite when I was in high school. But I didn't tell him that either. I didn't post about it. I wasn't even sure I ever mentioned it to anyone in real life. Yet he knew. It was like he had some inside information. The weirdness kept building. As the dinner went on, he dropped more little details about my life, stuff that I never mentioned. He knew what street I grew up on. He knew the high school I went to. He even knew the name of my old best friend, Julia, from elementary school. I started trying to piece it together in my head, but it didn't make sense. I mean, sure, we'd been talking for a while, but the stuff he knew was so specific. It was like he had access to some private version of my life, one that I hadn't shared with anyone, let alone a guy I just met online. At this point, I was getting uncomfortable, but I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid, so I just kept going along with it. But then, when we were done eating, he stood up to pay and said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "I always do my research." The way he said it was so casual, but the implication hit me like a ton of bricks. He was telling me he'd been looking up things about me before we even met. My skin prickled. I felt like I was suffocating in that booth, but I just smiled and nodded, trying to keep the mood light. He walked me in my car afterward, still chatting away, but I barely heard a word he was saying. My mind was racing. How did he know all of that stuff about me? Was he just really good at Googling people, or was there something more to it? He said goodbye with that same easy smile, but as he turned to walk away, he dropped something chilling. He said, "Don't worry. I'll be seeing you again soon." I watched him walk off into the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I wasn't sure if it was my anxiety or if it was just the weird vibe from dinner, but I couldn't ignore it. I went home, tried to shake it off, and crawled into bed. That's when things got worse. As I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, I glanced up at my window. The blinds were slightly open, and I froze. There on the glass was a red dot. It was small at first, but it was definitely there. A faint, glowing red dot in the middle of my window. It didn't look like a reflection. It didn't look like anything from inside my room. It was just there. My heart started pounding. I got up slowly, trying not to make any noise, and pulled the blinds closed as fast as I could. But I knew I couldn't ignore it. My gut told me that the red dot wasn't some weird coincidence. I grabbed my phone and called the police, explaining what happened, but by the time they showed up, there was no sign of anyone around. The dot was gone, and everything seemed too quiet. They checked around the house, but there wasn't anything to go on. The weirdest part, the next morning I looked out the window again, and the red dot was gone. No trace of it anywhere. I never saw Ned again after that. I deleted my Hinge profile, blocked him on everything. I tried to forget about it, but it's hard not to look over your shoulder when someone knows things about you that they shouldn't. I can't explain what happened. Maybe he was just a creepy guy who had a weird obsession with me, or maybe it was something even darker. All I know is I never used Hinge again after that night, and I still don't feel safe, especially when I'm alone in my room at night. I hope I never have to go through something like that again. So, I don't know if I should even be telling anyone this, but honestly, I can't shake it off. I don't even know where to begin. I guess I'll just start from the start. I met this guy, Tim, on a dating app. It was just one of those casual things. We matched on Bumble, exchanged a few messages, and everything seemed normal at first. He wasn't pushy or anything. He didn't try to hit me with any weird lines or anything crinky. In fact, he was funny. We had a decent conversation. Nothing alarming. We talked for a couple of days before we decided to meet up for coffee. I like that he didn't make it weird or overly romantic like some guys do when you first meet them. He was chill, we set the date, and the day came. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much, just a low-key coffee date with a guy I didn't know. When we met, he was cute enough, but there was something off about him. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Like, it wasn't anything major, just a weird vibe. I figured it was nothing. The date went okay, though. We talked about music, movies, travel, pretty typical stuff. I didn't feel a spark, but it wasn't a disaster. When we said goodbye, I figured that would be the end of it. Maybe I'd hear from him again, maybe I wouldn't. That's how dating apps go sometimes. But then things started getting weird. It started with a few texts, nothing crazy. Just casual check-ins like, how's your day going? Or what are you up to? But then, after a couple more days, I started noticing he was being a little too persistent. Like, I replied when I could, but he would send multiple messages if I didn't respond right away. Sometimes I'd get 5 or 6 texts in a row from him, all in a span of 10 minutes. At first, I thought maybe he was just excited or didn't understand boundaries, so I started being more distant. I wasn't interested, and I didn't want to lead him on. But he kept pushing, sending these long messages about how he felt we had a strong connection and how he couldn't wait to see me again. I told him I wasn't really feeling it, that I thought we were better off just being friends. I thought that would be the end of it. But that night, I got a call. It was late, around 11:30 p.m., and I had just crawled into bed. I just settled down with a book when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway, thinking it might be a wrong number or a robocall. The voice on the other end of the line wasn't familiar at first, and I almost hung up, thinking it was some telemarketer. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. I know where you live. I've been waiting for you. I froze. My heart dropped to my stomach. I didn't recognize the voice at all, but the way he said it was so calm, like it was no big deal. And that's when it clicked. It was Tim. I felt my pulse quicken, and I struggled to say anything, but he kept talking. He started describing places I'd been, places I'd mentioned in passing, like the park where I usually walk my dog, the restaurant I'd gone to with friends a few weeks ago. But here's the worst part. He started describing what I was wearing. I had been wearing this oversized sweater and leggings that day, and he described them in perfect detail. It was like he'd been following me. I couldn't breathe. I could hear him breathing, slow and steady, in the background, like he was waiting for me to say something, but I was frozen. He kept talking about how he knew where I was going and couldn't wait to see me again. The whole time I felt like I was going to pass out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to hang up. My hands were shaking and I was sweating. I immediately called my best friend, but she didn't pick up. I tried my mom and she didn't pick up either. My whole body was on high alert, like I was waiting for something to happen. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I got up, checked all the doors and windows, locked them all, and stayed up for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep a wink. I couldn't. The next morning, I went straight to work trying to act like everything was normal, but I couldn't get that phone call out of my head. Every time I heard a car pass by, I jumped. Every time I saw someone walking down the street, I wondered if it was him. I started looking over my shoulder all the time. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was a real physical reaction. I blocked him on everything. Tinder, Instagram, Facebook, everything. I thought blocking him would make it stop, but it didn't. A few days later, I was sitting in my apartment watching TV when I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind or someone walking by, but then I heard it again. It was like a whisper. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear it clear as day. My heart started to race. I ran to the window and peeked through the blinds, but there was no one there. My mind was playing tricks on me, I told myself. But then the next night, I heard it again. It was more distinct this time. It sounded like his voice. I couldn't take it anymore. I called the police, explained everything, and told them about the phone call and the whispering outside. They came and checked around the area, but found nothing. They couldn't do anything, though. There was no concrete evidence that anything illegal was happening. But I know what I heard. I know what I felt. It wasn't in my head. After that, I stopped leaving my apartment much. I started keeping the blinds closed all the time. I didn't answer my phone unless I knew who it was. I felt like I was living in a constant state of fear, but I didn't know what else to do. I never heard from Tim directly again, but I still hear those whispers. Sometimes they're faint, and sometimes they're clearer. Every time I hear them, my heart skips a beat. I don't know how long this is going to go on, but I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, waiting, watching. I never went back on a dating app after that. Honestly, I don't think I ever will. So this is a story I still can't shake off, even though it happened a while ago. It all started when I matched with Kate on Tinder. We'd been talking for a few days, and at first it was normal. Just the usual stuff you'd expect. What we're into, random jokes, making plans to meet up eventually. Nothing super weird. But then, things got intense fast. At first, I thought it was cute when she started calling me her soulmate. It was early, but I guess I brushed it off as her just being really into the whole romantic connection thing. She would text me all the time saying stuff like, I feel like we've known each other forever, or this is so weird, but I feel so connected to you. It was nice at first. I mean, it felt good to be wanted, and who doesn't like someone showing a lot of interest, right? But after a few days, I started getting texts constantly. Every time I would check my phone, there'd be another message from her. It wasn't anything creepy at first, just like, hey, hope you're having a good day, or I'd miss you already. But it got to the point where it was almost overwhelming. I tried to text her back when I could, but I was busy with work, seeing friends, and just trying to live my life. Still, it felt like I was doing something wrong when I wouldn't reply fast enough. The thing is, every time I didn't respond within an hour, she'd send another message and then another. If I didn't reply within a few hours, the tone of the messages started to shift. I guess you're too busy for me, or I hope you didn't forget about me. I started to feel like I was being smothered. I mean, we hadn't even met in person yet. And here she was, acting like we were already in a serious relationship. It was honestly starting to stress me out. One night, I came home after hanging out with some friends, and was in the middle of making dinner when I got a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I thought maybe it was a neighbor or a delivery. I opened the door, and there she was, Kate, standing in the hall with a big smile, holding a bottle of wine like she'd just come over for a casual hang. At first, I thought maybe it was some sort of joke. Like, did I invite her? I checked my messages, and I definitely hadn't. She looked kind of nervous but excited at the same time. I just knew where you lived, she said, like it was no big deal. I was kind of shocked and didn't know how to respond. I was not expecting this, especially not this early. I hadn't even given her my address, so how did she find me? She kept standing there, waiting for me to invite her in. My brain was going a million miles an hour trying to make sense of it. I could feel my stomach drop as I realized she had somehow tracked down where I lived. That's when I told her, as politely as I could, that this was too much and I needed her to leave. I could tell she was hurt by my response, and I hated seeing her upset, but I knew it was the only thing I could do. She didn't leave right away, though. She stood there for a second staring at me, then looked down at the wine she was holding. I just thought we were closer than this, she said. But I guess you're not as invested as I am. She said it so quietly, almost to herself, like I wasn't even supposed to hear it. I stepped back and told her again that I needed her to go. After a few seconds, she finally turned around, still holding the bottle of wine, and left. I felt so relieved when the door closed behind me, but something about the whole situation stuck with me. How the hell did she know where I lived? I didn't want to be rude, but that was crossing a serious line. The next few days, she kept texting me. She started calling me emotionally unavailable, saying things like, "I thought you were different, but you're just like the rest." I tried to explain that it was too soon for me to feel that comfortable with her, but it didn't matter. Her texts were relentless. She'd send 10 messages in a row, all with different tones. Some angry, some sad, some begging me to talk to her. At that point, I started feeling trapped. Every time I checked my phone, there'd be a notification from Kate. If I ignored her, I'd get a string of texts questioning if I was seeing someone else or why I wasn't giving her a chance. It was suffocating. I had to block her. I didn't want to, but I didn't know what else to do. I blocked her on Tinder, deleted my profile, and went silent. I thought it would be over after that, but it wasn't. For the next few weeks, I still had that nagging feeling that something was wrong. I couldn't shake the thought that she was still watching me somehow. I'd be walking around town and feel like someone was following me. It wasn't just in my head, either. There were times when I'd catch someone glancing at me from across the street, and it made my heart race. But I'd tell myself I was just being paranoid. But one night, a few weeks after blocking her, I was sitting in my living room when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a reflection in the window, a shadowy figure standing across the street, looking directly at my apartment. The streetlights weren't great, but I could make out a person's outline. They stood there, unmoving, for a good 10 minutes. It freaked me out so much that I went to my window, but by the time I looked outside, they were gone. It didn't take a genius to figure out who it was. I knew it had to be Kate. I tried calling a few friends to come over, but no one picked up. I ended up just sitting in my living room with the lights off, staring at the front door, waiting for her to show up again. Nothing happened that night, but the next few days I didn't leave my apartment much. I started noticing more weird things, like the occasional note left on my door or strange messages from unknown numbers. I couldn't escape the feeling that she was still out there watching. Eventually, I got enough courage to go to the police. I showed them some of the messages she had sent and told them of the time she showed up at my apartment. But they said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence, and I couldn't afford to keep filing reports every time something strange happened. I've never used Tinder again. In fact, I've stayed away from most dating apps since then. It's been months, but I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I'll get this weird sense of unease when I'm walking around like someone's just a little too close. I wish I could say it's all in my head, but deep down I know it's not. I'm still not sure how it all started, but I can tell you that I wish I had never downloaded that app. It's one of those situations where you think everything is normal, and then, out of nowhere, things get way too real. The weirdest part, it all started on Tinder. So, yeah, I matched with Chris. At first, it seemed pretty typical. He seemed like one of those guys who had it together, good job, decent photos, funny, all the usual stuff. He was friendly enough, asked about my interests, and even mentioned that he had a dog too, which was a nice little connection for me because I'm obsessed with my dog Penny. Seriously, she's my whole world. I go anywhere with her and I talk about her constantly. We texted for a couple of weeks. It was honestly pretty chill. He was cute, we had good conversations, and even joked about meeting up for drinks. But things started to get a little off after that. At first, it was subtle, just random texts from him, but then it escalated fast. One day, I woke up to a message from him saying, "Good morning. Penny looks cute in her red leash today, by the way." I was confused. Like, how did he know that? Penny does wear a red leash, but I never told him. I hadn't even posted a picture of her recently with it. I brushed it off, thinking maybe he'd seen a photo I'd posted before or something, but still, it felt a little weird. Then it happened again. A few days later, I got another message. I saw you walking her by the park today. How was the walk? He sent it right after I had taken Penny to the park. The thing is, I didn't tell him I was going to the park. He had no way of knowing I was there. I started to feel that weird unease you get when something doesn't quite add up, but I didn't want to be rude, so I played it off like it was no big deal. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But then the next thing came that really got to me. I got a notification on my phone one evening. It was a picture message from Chris, but it wasn't a picture of us or anything cute. It was a picture of my house. Not like some random photo from Google either. No, this was a picture he took. From across the street, I could see my driveway, my front door, and the trees in my yard. In the corner of the photo, you could barely make out Penny, who was sitting near the window. I froze. My heart started pounding, and I could feel my palms sweating. My phone felt heavy in my hand. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was a mistake, that maybe he had just gotten confused or something, but I couldn't shake the fear. He had clearly been watching me, and now he had somehow gotten close enough to my house to snap that picture. I blocked him immediately, deleted the app, told myself it was over, but it wasn't. The next day, I was at work trying to forget about the whole situation. It was a normal Tuesday morning. I had a bunch of things to get done, but as I sat down at my desk, I saw another notification from Chris. My stomach twisted in knots. It was another photo. This one? It was of my street. The photo was taken from a distance, but it was unmistakably my block, my street side, my neighbors' houses, and my car parked right in front of my house. He was getting closer. I didn't know how, but somehow he was tracking me. I felt sick. I didn't even have time to process what was happening before I got another message from him. I'm just trying to be closer to you. I'll be seeing you soon. I couldn't take it anymore. I was terrified. At that point, I knew I had to do something about it, but I didn't know what. I called my best friend, and she said I needed to tell the police. She kept telling me that I wasn't crazy, that he was stalking me, and it wasn't safe to ignore it. I wasn't sure what the police could even do, but I went to the station and reported it. They didn't seem overly concerned at first, but after seeing the photos and hearing everything, they agreed to look into it. They told me to change my routine and to report any more incidents, but nothing really prepared me for what happened next. That same week on Thursday afternoon, I was working when I saw someone walk by my office window. It wasn't unusual for people to walk by, but something about this person caught my attention. They didn't look familiar. I stood up from my desk trying to get a better look, and then I saw the unmistakable figure, Chris. He was just standing there looking at my building. My blood ran cold. He had followed me to work. I didn't even know what to do in that moment. I wanted to scream, but I didn't want him to know I'd seen him. I was on the verge of panic when I called the police again. The officers arrived quickly, and thankfully, Chris was gone by the time they showed up. But the damage had been done. I couldn't stop shaking. It took me a couple hours to finally feel like I wasn't on edge. I knew I couldn't stay in that building alone, so I left early and went straight home. But the fear was just too much. I couldn't relax. I felt like I was constantly being watched. Every time I heard footsteps outside my door or saw a shadow in my window, I would freeze. The police told me that I had enough evidence to get a restraining order, so I did. I wasn't going to take any more chances. When the judge granted the restraining order, I felt a little relief, but it didn't completely wipe away the fear. I haven't heard from Chris since the restraining order went through, but the whole thing left me paranoid. I still check my windows every night before bed. I still lock every door, every window, and have even gotten security cameras just to be safe. I had trouble trusting people online ever since. Tinder is something I'd rather forget about. Dating apps just aren't worth it if it means risking this kind of thing. The most disturbing part. A few months ago, I found a piece of paper in my mailbox with a single sentence written on it. I'm always watching you. I don't know if it's really Chris or just some sick joke, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. I just don't know how long I'll have to live with this fear. This happened a few months ago, and I still can't shake it. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I figured I should finally tell someone. I met this woman, Rachel, on OkCupid, and at first, everything seemed pretty normal. You know how it goes. You message back and forth a bit, talk about basic stuff like hobbies, music, movies, all the usual things. It felt pretty chill. She was cute, smart, and seemed down to earth. Her profile was really well thought out, and she had a lot of the same interests as me, so I thought it'd be worth meeting up in person. But things got weird really fast. We'd been talking for maybe 4 or 5 days, and then out of nowhere, her messages started to shift. They weren't the casual, fun texts I was used to. Instead, she started sending these texts that felt like, well, they felt demanding in a way that made me uncomfortable. At first, it wasn't super obvious, but it got worse. It started with little things like, why aren't you texting me back? Do you not like me? Or, are you seeing someone else? I was a bit taken aback. I thought maybe she was just insecure or something. I tried to brush it off. But then one night, I opened my phone to a message that made my heart stop. It was a picture of my apartment building. A photo taken from the street, clearly snapped from someone just standing there. There were no streetlights around, so the photo was a little dark, but you could see the outline of my building clearly enough. She sent the photo with a simple caption, "I'll wait for you to come out." I froze. I had never told her where I lived. We'd only talked online, and I'd never mentioned my address. I didn't even share my neighborhood or anything close to it. So how did she know where I lived? I started to feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't respond, but my heart was pounding. I immediately blocked her number, but it didn't stop there. The next morning, I woke up to another message from her, this time from a different account. Same profile pic, just a different name. It hit me that she had created a whole new account just to keep contacting me. I blocked that account too, but by then, I was already feeling like I needed to get out of there. I had a bad feeling, and that feeling didn't go away. It only got worse. I deleted my Occupid profile entirely. I figured that would solve the problem, but it didn't. A few days later, I was walking home from the grocery store, and I noticed someone across the street walking at the same pace as me. I didn't think much of it at first. People walk at the same pace all the time, but then I looked over and there she was, Rachel. I saw her standing on the other side of the street staring at me. She didn't smile or wave, just stood there watching. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I didn't even know what to do. I just kept walking, pretending like I hadn't noticed her, but I could feel my palms sweating. It felt like my whole body was on high alert. The walk home was longer than usual, and I couldn't stop looking behind me. I kept thinking she was following me, but I didn't dare turn around again to check. When I got inside, I locked the door, checked all the windows, and just sat down, trying to calm myself down. I couldn't get the image of her standing there out of my head. It felt like something out of a bad movie. The next few days were even worse. My phone would ring, but it was always an unknown number. I never answered it. And every now and then, I'd get a message from an unknown account. They would say things like, "I saw you walk into your building today," or "I know what you're doing this weekend." It was starting to feel like I was being hunted. I even started to get the feeling that she might be watching me from a distance like a shadow, but I never saw her for sure again. Eventually, I couldn't take any more. I went to the police and filed a report. I had the photos from her, the messages, the details of her stalking behavior. But like most people who've been in a situation like this, I was told there wasn't a lot they could do without more concrete proof or her actually breaking any laws. That's when I realized I had to change everything. I started taking different routes home from work, stopped going to places I'd usually go, and even changed my grocery store. I made sure I was never alone in public places. Then I thought I was in the clear. I hadn't heard anything for a while, and I figured she'd given up. I kept checking the locks on my doors and windows every night, but that was just out of habit by now. Then one night, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't open it, but something told me I should. It was her. The text was simple but bone-chilling. It said, "You can't hide forever." I don't know what it is about that message, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just creepy, it felt threatening. I called the police again, but by the time they showed up, there was nothing to report. She was gone, and that was the last I ever heard from her. I don't know if she was just really obsessed or if something was seriously wrong with her, but that entire experience made me rethink everything about dating apps. I stopped using them. I made sure all my social media accounts were private, and I've been way more careful about what I share online since. I still get the occasional weird vibe when I walk around my neighborhood or if I see someone standing a little too close to me on the street. I've gotten so paranoid that I keep checking behind me now, just to make sure I'm not being followed. I really thought I'd moved on, but I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there somewhere watching. I guess that's the thing with dating apps. You never really know who you're talking to until it's too late. So this happened about a year ago, and I'm still not sure if I was just imagining things or if it was something genuinely off. Either way, I don't think I'll ever use Tinder again. Here's what happened. I matched with a guy named Jake on Tinder. His profile was totally normal, nothing weird or out of place. He had a few good pictures, a couple with friends, some with his dog. He seemed nice, and his messages were super chill, so after a couple of days of chatting, we agreed to meet in person. Nothing crazy, just coffee at a local cafe. Pretty standard, right? I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. But as soon as I saw him in real life, something felt wrong. I can't explain it, but his eyes stood out immediately. There was something off about them. They were wide open, but it wasn't like he was staring at me. It was more like he was looking through me. His gaze was just blank, like there was no emotion behind it. I've met plenty of people with different types of eyes, but these were just unsettling. Empty. I felt my stomach drop as I walked up to him, and I instantly got a weird vibe, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was just being paranoid. We sat down, ordered our drinks, and started talking. But it wasn't like a normal conversation. He barely smiled, and his voice was weirdly monotone, like really flat. He didn't sound angry or sad, but he didn't sound happy either. It was just empty. I can't explain it any other way. He would say things like, "We were meant to meet," or "This is how it was supposed to happen." At first, I figured he was just nervous or awkward, but the more he talked, the more unsettled I felt. I kept trying to steer the conversation to normal topics, movies, work, anything, but he kept going back to this destiny talk. I honestly don't remember most of what he said because it just felt like a blur, but I could feel the unease growing. It wasn't even the words themselves, but the way he said them, like he was too sure about it, like there was something dark behind his calm words. And that's when I made the decision to leave. I didn't even know what I was trying to avoid. I just felt this overwhelming need to get away. So I faked some excuse like I had to be somewhere, and I ended the date early. He didn't push back. He just nodded and said, "Oh, okay, I'll see you again soon." It was so casual, like he was certain. I remember walking out of that cafe so fast, like my legs couldn't carry me fast enough. Once I got home, I thought about blocking him, but I didn't do it right away. I just went about my day and tried to shake off the weirdness. Maybe I was overthinking it, I told myself, but the whole situation kept gnawing at me. It wasn't until later that night that things started getting strange. I got a Tinder notification. It was a like from Jake. At first I thought, okay, maybe he just liked my profile again. Maybe he just didn't realize what happened. But it wasn't just one like, it was a few. Over the next couple of days, I kept getting random likes from him. Just likes, nothing else. No messages, no conversation. And here's the thing, I had already unmatched him. I know because I remember doing it that night when I got home, just to be done with it. But there it was, his profile popping up on my screen again. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It felt like I was being watched. I know that sounds dramatic, but every time I opened Tinder, there'd be a new like from him. Even though I had unmatched him, it was like he was lurking in the background, constantly popping up. He wasn't saying anything, but it was like he was still there. I would check my notifications, and his profile was always sitting there waiting. The worst part was I didn't know how he was doing it. Was he stalking me? Was he using a different account to still look at my profile? Was it just a glitch? I started feeling paranoid every time I went on Tinder. I kept thinking that maybe I'd see him in public again, or that he'd show up at my door. Every time I get a notification, my heart would race. I didn't want to see his name pop up again, but I couldn't escape it. A few more days passed and I kept getting those likes, but there were still no messages from him. Then one night, I got a message from an account I didn't recognize. I was almost afraid to open it, but I did. It was a message from a different Tinder profile that looked exactly like Jake's. Same pictures, same bio, everything. The only difference, this profile was new. Like a brand new account that had been created since I had unmatched him. The message was simple, just, "I'll be waiting for you." I blocked the account immediately. My hands were shaking when I did it, and I knew I couldn't let this go on any longer. I deleted Tinder right after that. I just didn't want to be part of it anymore. Something felt wrong, and I didn't want to push my luck. I still have no idea how he was doing it, how he kept popping up, or why he seemed so persistent. I don't know if he was just messing with me or if something more sinister was going on. But I do know that I haven't gone back to Tinder since. I don't think I ever will. I still get weird feelings sometimes when I'm out, like I'm being watched. I can't shake it, honestly. I feel like I'm always checking my surroundings. I hate that I let it get that far, but I can't go back now. Anyway, I just wanted to get this off my chest. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's something more. I don't know. If you're ever on Tinder, just trust your gut. If something feels off, don't ignore it. I sure won't. So this happened a little while ago, and I still can't shake the weirdness of it. I had been using plenty of fish on and off for a few months, mostly just trying to meet people, casually. I wasn't expecting anything serious, just someone to chat with. That's my match with Ben. At first, he seemed totally normal. He had a nice smile, his profile didn't seem like a scam, and we started talking pretty quickly. The usual stuff: work, hobbies, movies. Nothing too out of the ordinary. After a few days of messaging, though, he started getting a little too personal. Like, way too personal. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he just liked to ask questions. Maybe he was just trying to be engaging. But the more we talked, the more it seemed like he knew things about me that I hadn't told him. Things that weren't even on my profile. He sent me a message one day saying, "I saw you at that concert last week." The thing is, I hadn't posted about going to that concert anywhere. I didn't even tell my friends exactly where I was going, so I wasn't sure how he'd known. I thought it was a coincidence at first. Maybe he was just guessing. But then he said something else that made my stomach twist. "I noticed you walk your dog at the park every morning." I froze. I'd never mentioned anything about walking my dog, not even to him. I didn't post about it on social media, and it wasn't something I talked about in our conversations. He was literally describing something that only I did, and no one else knew about. I didn't know what to do. I thought about just letting it go, maybe assuming he was just being creepy but not dangerous. But then I started to get paranoid. How did he know these things? Was he stalking me? I confronted him about it. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I told him that I was freaked out by how much he seemed to know about my life. His response was chilling. He just said, "I know more about you than you think." I didn't know how to respond to that. It was like he was toying with me, almost daring me to figure out how much he actually knew. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to talk to him anymore. I blocked him and deleted my Plenty of Fish account, but that didn't stop it from getting worse. The next day, I went to my car after work, and there was a note on my windshield. Just a small piece of paper with a message written in blocky, uneven handwriting. It said, "I'm waiting to meet you." I almost lost it right there in the parking lot. I felt this cold, crawling fear take over. How had he found me? I hadn't told him where I lived or where I worked. I'd never given him any hint of my daily routine, so how the hell did he know my car? It wasn't a huge leap to assume that Ben had been following me, watching me somehow, even if I didn't know how. But that note made everything so real. It wasn't just a weird guy on the internet anymore. It was someone who was watching me in person. I couldn't stay in the same place anymore. It felt like everything around me had become unsafe. I went home that night and started looking for new places to move. I couldn't take the chance of him showing up at my apartment or worse, my jaw. After that, I didn't stay in the same place for long. I found a new place to live in a different part of town, far from where I had been. I made sure to change my routine. I started walking a different route to work, took different streets, even changed the times I'd leave in the morning just in case. I told my friends about what happened, but I still didn't want to let them know exactly how much it had messed with my head. The whole thing had freaked me out in a way I couldn't explain. It was just this nagging, suffocating feeling like I was being watched all the time. I kept checking over my shoulder when I walked outside. I locked the doors more often. I haven't used Plenty of Fish since. I deleted all my dating apps completely, and I don't know if I'll ever go back to them. I don't know if Ben was just some guy who took things too far or if there was something really wrong with him, but I didn't want to find out. It's been a few months since everything happened, and things have gotten a little better. I don't feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder anymore, but the weirdest thing still happens sometimes. I'll be out walking my dog at the park, my new different park on the way, and I'll see someone who reminds me of Ben. They'll be standing just a little too still or looking at me for just a bit too long, and my heart will skip. It's like my brain doesn't fully let go of the fear, and always wondering if I'm still being watched. Maybe it's irrational, but that's how it is now. I guess I'll never really know what Ben's deal was. Maybe he was harmless, just creepy. Or maybe he was something worse. Either way, I won't ever know for sure. But I do know that I haven't felt truly safe since it happened, and that feeling sticks with you. That's what they don't tell you when you're swiping through profiles. Sometimes it's not just strangers online. Sometimes they're out there waiting for you to take that next step. I swear, I still get creeped out thinking about this. It all started when I matched with Ikra on Tinder. Her profile looked totally normal. She had a couple of cute pictures, a funny bio, and we had some pretty chill conversations. I'm not looking for anything super serious, just someone to talk to, so I thought, why not? She was funny, seemed cool, and we had a lot in common. We were talking about music, shows we liked, and random stuff like that. It felt easy. But then things started getting weird. It wasn't right away, but after a few days of chatting, she started texting me at all hours. And I mean all hours. Like, I'd get texts at 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. sometimes. At first, I didn't think too much of it. I figured she was just a night owl or something, but then it started happening more often. I'd be in the middle of work or hanging out with friends, and my phone would buzz with a message from her. It was always something random, like a meme or just a quick, hey, what's up? But it wasn't the messages that were off. It was the timing. It felt like she was always there, always reaching out at these weird times. I tried to brush it off, but the call started. At first, they were just little missed calls at odd times, like in the middle of the night or early morning. I'd wake up to my phone buzzing, and when I checked, it was Ikra calling. I'd be half asleep, so I'd ignore it, thinking she probably just had the wrong number or something. But then one night, I actually picked up. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I thought it was a wrong number again, or maybe I was just curious. But the second I answered, there was nothing. Just silence. Not even static, just pure uncomfortable silence. I could hear some heavy breathing, like someone was right there listening to me. It didn't feel right. I felt my skin crawl as I just waited for something, anything, to break the silence, but nothing happened. Then, after what felt like forever, I hung up. I sent her a text right after asking what was going on. I didn't want to be confrontational, but I needed answers. Was she just messing with me? Was it a prank call? It wasn't until a few minutes later that I got a reply. I know you're awake. You can't hide from me. That was it. I read the message over and over, trying to make sense of it. But the more I read it, the weirder it got. What did she mean by that? How did she know if I was awake? I wasn't going to freak out yet, but my gut was telling me something was very off. That message didn't sit right with me at all. I didn't want to blow it out of proportion, so I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was some weird misunderstanding. I ignored the text for a while, but that didn't stop her from texting me even more. The next day, she started texting me every couple of hours, more random stuff at first, but then it got darker. The texts were less playful, more intense. She'd ask things like, why aren't you answering? Or where are you right now? It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was almost like she was demanding to know what I was doing where I was. I started to get really uncomfortable. I didn't know if she was being serious or if this was just some game she was playing, but I didn't want to take the chance. So I decided to block her. I figured that would be the end of it. I felt a bit of relief, but it didn't last. A few hours after I blocked her, I got another notification. It wasn't from her regular number. It was from a different account, one of those disposable text services. At first, I didn't recognize the number, but when I read the message, I felt my stomach drop. It said, you can't get away from me. I know where you live. Now, at this point, I was officially freaking out. I didn't know how she got my number again, and I definitely didn't know how she could possibly know where I lived. I hadn't told her my address. The only place she could have possibly known about me was through the profile I made on Tinder, but I'd never shared personal details like my address there. The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I got. Was she been stalking me? Had she been showing up at places I go? The next few days were just as bad. I started getting weird, cryptic texts. Things like, I can see you, and I know your routine. She was always so vague, but at the same time, it felt like she was too specific. It was almost like she knew things I hadn't shared, and it made me paranoid that she was watching me somehow. I had a feeling that she was just waiting for me to slip up to reveal something, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I didn't even leave my apartment for a couple of days. I started double-checking my locks, checking the windows, even walking around my apartment just to make sure nothing seemed out of place. I kept thinking I heard footsteps outside, or that someone was moving around in the hallway, but when I checked, there was never anyone there. It was all in my head, but it felt so real. Finally, I couldn't take any more. I deleted my Tinder account and changed my phone number. I moved to a new area and did my best to lay low for a while. I didn't want to risk bumping into her anywhere. Every time I saw someone that looked even remotely like her, I'd freak out. Every unknown number that called me made my heart race. I never heard from Ikra again after that. Part of me wonders if she really was just playing some twisted game, or if there was something more sinister going on. I'm still not sure what she was trying to do. Maybe she just got a thrill from making me feel scared. Either way, I don't ever want to find out. That's the last time I'll ever trust someone on a dating app without getting a lot more careful. I never thought I'd end up here, but sometimes you just can't predict how quickly things can go south. It all started when I matched with a guy named Ryan on Bumble. His profile seemed fine, nothing that screamed red flags. He had a few decent photos, a couple of cute hobbies listed, and his bio was short but sweet. We exchanged a few messages, mostly small talk at first, but things were cool. He was funny, seemed like he had his life together, and we got along fine. After a few days of chatting, he started texting me more frequently. At first, I thought it was kind of nice. I mean, I like when someone shows interest, right? But after a while, his messages started coming in nonstop. I've been thinking about you. When can we meet again? I can't stop thinking about your smile. It was like a constant stream of texts, and it was starting to get a little much. I hadn't even met this guy in person yet, and here he was bombarding me with all these compliments. I mean, I'd never even sent him any flirtatious messages, so it was weird how quickly he escalated things. The text went from sweet to, well, kind of creepy. I tried to brush it off at first, thinking maybe he was just overexcited. But when it didn't stop, I started to get uncomfortable. Things started getting even stranger when I noticed Ryan was leaving comments on my social media posts. And not just the stuff I posted recently, he was commenting on older photos, some from my Instagram I hadn't shared with him. Photos of me from family vacations, ones from last year, stuff I only posted for friends to see. How did he even find those? At first, I figured maybe I had posted them to my stories and didn't realize, but it quickly became clear he was commenting on pictures that were a few months old. I had no idea how he was seeing them, but he was leaving these long, intense comments. Stuff like, "You've always been so beautiful," or "I can't believe you're real." It started to feel invasive, like way invasive. I started to feel like I was being watched. It wasn't just the comments that were unsettling, it was how he was responding to things I hadn't even told him. A few times, I'd post something random on my story about my day or an event I was going to, and the next message I'd get from Ryan would be like he already knew. For example, I posted a picture of my dog at the park, and then the next message was, "Your dog looks so cute. Did you take her to the park today? I've been thinking about you both." I hadn't mentioned anything about that on the app or in conversation. So how did he know? I had no clue, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like he was tracking me somehow. I know it sounds paranoid, but it's the only way I can describe it. The comments on my photos, the texts about stuff I never shared with him. Everything felt like too much. Too fast. I tried to distance myself. I started responding less, hoping he'd get the hint, but he didn't. If anything, he just ramped up the attention. He would send these random texts at weird hours, like 3 a.m. I would try to ignore it, but the last straw came when I woke up one morning to find a message that made my stomach drop. It read, "I drove by your apartment today. I know you live alone." I couldn't even process it at first. My heart started pounding as I stared at the message. How did he know where I lived? I hadn't told him my address, not even close. I hadn't posted anything online about where I lived, but somehow he knew. That's when I realized this wasn't just some innocent crush. It was stalking. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I immediately blocked him on Bumble, hoping that would be enough, but I knew deep down that it probably wasn't. I started going through all my privacy settings, tightening everything up on my social media accounts, deleting old posts that I didn't want anyone to find. But that didn't stop him. Later that night, I checked my phone again, and there was another message, this time from a new account. I had no idea how he created another one so fast, but there it was. "I can't wait to see you again. I've been thinking about you nonstop." This time, I didn't even hesitate. I deleted my Instagram and Facebook accounts entirely. I didn't want to leave any trace of myself behind for him to find. I was paranoid now. I started double checking my locks at night, turning on the security lights outside my apartment, and not answering my phone unless I knew who it was. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I spent days looking over my shoulder. It felt like I was constantly on edge, even when I was out in public. If I saw someone who looked even remotely like him, my heart would race. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't stop thinking about how easily he seemed to find my personal information. How could he have gotten so close to me in such a short amount of time? Eventually, after what felt like weeks of this constant dread, I went to the police. I had the texts and the creepy social media comments saved, but I didn't know if they'd be able to do anything. I felt like I was overreacting, but at the same time, I couldn't risk it. The police told me there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence, but they did suggest I keep a log of any further contact. They'd also advised me to continue being cautious and to report anything suspicious. It took the details down, but it didn't feel like enough. I couldn't take it anymore. I moved to a new neighborhood far away from the apartment I'd been living in. I even changed my phone number and made all my social media profiles private, where I'd never reach out again, and I haven't seen him since. But every time I hear a car outside my window at night or a phone number I don't recognize, I still feel that knot in my stomach. I guess the weirdest part is how fast things escalated with Ryan. One minute, everything was fine, and the next, I was completely terrified. It's hard to explain why things felt so off, but looking back, I can see all the little signs I missed. I still don't know how he found out so much about me, but I do know that I'll never trust anyone that easily again. I thought I was just having a normal time on Hinge. I'd been using the app for a few weeks, swiping through profiles, chatting with some decent guys. Nothing too crazy, just the usual casual dating stuff. That was until I matched with Tom. Tom's profile was pretty standard. He had a few good pictures, a decent bio, and seemed like a nice enough guy. He didn't seem too eager or intense at first, so I figured why not? We started chatting, and honestly, he seemed sweet. He had this calm, polite way about him, and we clicked pretty easily. We talked about some random stuff, music, movies, travel plans, whatever came up. The conversation flowed pretty naturally. But after a couple of days of texting, something started to feel off. At first, it was small things like how quickly he would respond to my messages, even if I hadn't been replying right away. It was almost like he was constantly online, waiting to talk. Then the messages started to get a little weirder. At first, I thought I was just overthinking things, but then it started happening more and more, cryptic messages that made me feel uncomfortable. One night, I woke up to a text that said, "I know where you'll be next week." I didn't even respond to it. I figured it was some kind of joke or just a weird attempt at being romantic. But when I didn't answer, he sent more. Things like, "I can feel your thoughts," and "I know what you're thinking right now." Okay, that was it. I couldn't just ignore it anymore. I was genuinely freaked out. This wasn't normal behavior, even if he was just trying to be quirky or flirty. No one should be sending messages like that after only a few days of talking. I tried to brush it off, but it didn't sit well with me at all. So I blocked him. That was the last I thought I'd hear from him. I figured that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. A few days later, I was scrolling through my feed and noticed a new notification. Someone had liked my profile. I opened it, and there it was, Tom's profile, but the name was different, and the pictures, completely new ones. I double-checked it, thinking maybe I was imagining things, but no, it was definitely him. He had made a whole new account with the new name, new pictures, everything. I couldn't believe it. How was he able to make a new account so quickly? And why was he trying to contact me again? I had blocked him. He shouldn't have been able to reach me. But there he was, under a different name, trying to get my attention again. I immediately unmatched him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. It wasn't just that he was creating fake accounts to get in touch with me. It was the fact that he was so relentless about it. He was following me, trying to get into my space, even when I had made it clear I didn't want anything to do with him. And that's when it hit me. He'd been tracking me somehow. How else would he know to keep making new profiles and send me these creepy, invasive messages? At that point, I was done. I didn't want to risk it anymore. I deleted my entire Hinge account. I didn't even want to mess around with that app anymore. The idea that someone could create fake accounts to get close to me made me feel completely unsafe. I didn't know if he was just some lonely guy who couldn't take no for an answer, or if something darker was going on. But either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I changed my settings on every social media account too. I went through everything, making sure my profiles were as private as possible. I also unfollowed some accounts that seemed to be linked to mutual friends, just to make sure I wasn't making it too easy for someone to track me down. I didn't even trust the people I thought I knew anymore. A part of me thought I was being paranoid, but after everything that had happened, I just couldn't risk it. I couldn't let myself stay in that situation where someone was trying to worm their way into my life without my consent. And what if this wasn't the first time he'd done something like this? What if I wasn't the only one? The worst part, I still don't know how he found me again so easily. I didn't give in any personal info beyond basic stuff we talked about in the app. I didn't even post a lot of personal stuff online. So how did he know so much? I still can't wrap my head around it. The whole thing left me feeling paranoid for weeks. Every time my phone would buzz, I'd check it, half expecting it to be him again, with another new account or message. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel normal. I started double checking my locks at night, always feeling like someone might be watching me or tracking my every move. I've since deleted all my dating app accounts, and I haven't looked back. I know some people might think I'm overreacting, but when you go through something like that, you don't take any chances. You learn quickly to trust your instincts, and mine were screaming that Tom wasn't someone to mess with. I haven't heard from him since I deleted everything, and I'm hoping it stays that way. The scariest part. I'll never really know what he was up to, or why he couldn't just take the hint when I blocked him the first time. But one thing's for sure, I don't plan on ever going back to Hinge or any other dating app. It just wasn't worth it. I never thought I'd be writing one of these stories, but here I am. It all started when I matched with a guy named Chris on Tinder. He seemed pretty normal at first, the kind of guy you'd expect to meet on a dating app. His profile pictures were all casual, and his bio said something like, looking for someone real. Seemed harmless, right? We exchanged a few messages and everything seemed fine. At first, it was just the usual chit-chat about music, movies, our favorite foods, that sort of thing. There were no red flags, no weird vibes. I thought maybe this guy could actually be someone I'd want to meet. He even seemed a bit shy but sweet. It felt like a breath of fresh air compared to some of the guys I'd encountered on dating apps who were just trying to rush things or were super full of themselves. But then, after a few days of talking, things started to take a weird turn. I remember waking up one morning to a message from Chris that seemed off. Instead of the usual casual, hey, how's your day? It was something like, I want you to belong to me. At first, I figured maybe he was just being flirty or weird in a playful way, but I honestly felt a little unsettled. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I just brushed it off and said something light like, haha, okay, that's a little intense, but whatever. But then it kept going. The next message was even weirder, you're mine now. I didn't know what to make of it. Was this guy seriously getting possessive after only a few days of texting? It wasn't the cute, playful kind of possessive. It felt like something darker, something that made me immediately uncomfortable. Now, I know it might sound dramatic, but I felt the sudden urge to shut this down before it got worse. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I replied with something like, that's a little too much, Chris. Let's keep it chill, yeah. At that point, I thought that would be enough to steer the conversation back to normal, but he didn't back off. Instead, it got worse. His next message was something about how he could feel me, which was, to be honest, really creepy. Like, what does that even mean? I tried to shake it off and just put my phone down for a while, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The messages kept coming one after the other. They were always short but intense, almost like he was trying to send some kind of command. Things like, I'll be waiting for you, and you'll see me soon. By this point, I was seriously getting freaked out. I wasn't sure if he was joking or if he was just messed up. It didn't feel playful anymore. It felt invasive. I felt like he was trying to worm his way into my life in ways I wasn't comfortable with. The next day, I decided to take action. I blocked him. I didn't want to deal with whatever was going on, and I figured that would be the end of it. But no, it wasn't. A couple of hours after I blocked him, I was scrolling through Instagram when I got a message request from an account I didn't recognize. It was Chris. He had made a whole new account just to message me. The messages were more of the same. I'm not letting you go. You belong to me. I could feel my stomach sinking into the pit of my body. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but it didn't sit right with me. Not at all. At this point, I started to feel like I was being watched. Every time my phone buzzed, I thought it was him again. Every time I went out or saw someone staring at me, I wondered if it was him. I had to check my surroundings in case he was out there lurking. I blocked him again. I blocked the new account too. I even checked his old profile and noticed that he had changed his location. It seemed like he was making his whole existence on the app about me. It made me feel trapped. I felt like no matter what I did, he'd find a way to reach out. A few days later, things took an even darker turn. I was at the grocery store minding my business when I saw someone who looked like him. He wasn't looking at me directly, but I knew it was him. There was something about the way he carried himself, the way he was dressed, that made it obvious. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I turned quickly, leaving the store as fast as I could without making a scene. That was the moment I realized that this wasn't just some online creep anymore. This guy was either tracking me or just randomly happening to be in the same place as I was. Either way, it freaked me out. I didn't know if I should go to the police or just let it go. But after that, I knew I couldn't just ignore it anymore. I deleted all my dating app accounts, including Tinder, and I made all my social media private. I didn't want to take any chances. What still bothers me the most is that I'll never know exactly what he wanted or why he did it. Was he just trying to be controlling and obsessive? Or was there something more sinister at play? Either way, it was enough to completely freak me out and make me square off dating apps for good. I haven't heard from Chris since I blocked him on everything, and I hope it stays that way. I still get a bit paranoid whenever I see someone who looks like him, even though I haven't seen him in person again. It's weird though, sometimes I still wonder if he's out there still watching. And that's what's so terrifying about it all. You never really know who you're talking to on these apps. You think it's just harmless chatting, but sometimes it turns into something much darker. I'm not sure why I'm even sharing this, but I guess it's the kind of thing that needs to be said. I've never been the type to believe in horror stories from dating apps, but after what happened with Ethan, I'm not so sure anymore. It all started on Tinder, like most things do these days. I'd been swiping for a while and had mostly ignored a bunch of people who didn't seem interesting, but then I came across Ethan. His photos were honestly perfect. He looked like he had it all together: handsome, stylish, a nice smile, even in some of those candid shots where he looked like he was living his best life. He even had this picture of him at a concert that made him look like he was enjoying life. That photo alone got me. I swiped right. We started chatting, and honestly, the conversation was pretty chill at first. He was charismatic, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After about a week of texting back and forth, he suggested we meet out for dinner. It wasn't anything too formal, just a laid-back dinner at this trendy restaurant downtown that I had been wanting to try. I thought, why not? He seems cool. So the day the date rolls around, and I'm feeling a little nervous but excited. I got dressed up, nothing too fancy, but enough to feel put together, and I arrived at the restaurant a little early. The place was buzzing with energy, which made it feel like a good vibe, so I was optimistic. But then, when I saw him, I froze for a second. Ethan didn't look anything like his pictures. I mean, don't get me wrong, he was still a decent-looking guy, but he was much older than I expected. His hairline was clearly receding, and the clothes he was wearing were outdated, like something my dad would wear to a family barbecue, not something a guy in his 30s would choose for a night out. I'll admit I was confused. I mean, he was still a decent guy, but he didn't look anything like the polished, fresh out of a magazine guy I had been texting. He noticed my hesitation almost immediately, and in his typical smooth way, he brushed it off. He explained that the photos on his profile were from a few years ago, and that, well, time had taken its toll. I used to look a lot better, but life happens, he said with a little chuckle, clearly not bothered by it. I didn't know how to react. I was kind of disappointed, but I figured I was already there, so why not see how the night went? We sat down, and the waiter came over, but I could feel my nerves ramping up. It wasn't just his appearance that made me uneasy. It was the way he was staring at me. Not like a normal, I'm trying to get to know you stare, but more like he was studying me, almost like he was trying to figure me out. It was subtle, but enough to make me self-conscious. As we started talking, it got even weirder. At first, we kept things light. He asked about my job, my hobbies, what I like to do for fun. But then the questions started getting more personal. Like, he'd ask about my childhood, my family, things I had never mentioned on my Tinder profile. Stuff like, how do you feel about your mom's influence on your life? And when was the last time you had a serious conversation with your dad? It was so specific and personal that I started feeling like he wasn't just making small talk. He was collecting information. Information he had no business knowing. I tried to steer the conversation back to safer topics, but it didn't really work. Every time I answered a question, he'd just nod, stare at me, and then ask something else like he was piecing together a puzzle. It was starting to feel suffocating, and I realized I was no longer enjoying the dinner. I was actually getting kind of freaked out. By the time we were halfway through our meal, I couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't sure if he was just socially awkward or if there was something seriously off about him, but I had to get out of there. I made some excuse about having a busy day ahead and said I needed to head home. It wasn't exactly the way I had imagined ending the evening, but I didn't want to stick around any longer. As I stood up to leave, I could hear him chuckling under his breath, almost like he was amused by something. It wasn't a friendly laugh, it was more like he was pleased with himself, like he had been successful in whatever weird game he was playing. I didn't stick around to figure it out. I rushed out of the restaurant, my heart pounding. I was so freaked out that I didn't even look back. As I walked down the street towards my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just his creepy behavior during dinner, but the way he laughed like he knew something I didn't. I tried to brush it off as just nerves, but the unease stuck with me. A few days later, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Ethan was still active on Tinder. His profile was still there, and he had even liked a few of my photos again. But here's the thing, he hadn't messaged me once. Not since dinner. It was like he was just watching me from the sidelines. I started looking through his profile more closely, and that's when I saw it. He had changed a couple of his photos. Some of the pictures that had been on there before were gone, replaced with new ones. It wasn't a huge change, but it felt like he was constantly tweaking it, keeping it fresh, like he was preparing for something. The whole thing just gave me the creeps. It wasn't that he was some dangerous psycho, but the feeling of being watched, of being analyzed like some kind of puzzle piece, was unsettling. I couldn't get it out of my head. I ended up deleting my Tinder account after that. I didn't want any more contact with Ethan, and I didn't want to take any chances. The whole situation had turned from something that seemed like a harmless date into something much darker in my mind. I don't know what Ethan's deal was or if he was just socially awkward, but I haven't used Tinder since. I'm still kind of wary of dating apps, honestly. The thought that someone could be out there watching me, analyzing me like that, it's enough to make anyone paranoid. I've been on a lot of dates through Hinge. Some good, some meh, but nothing really compares to the one with James. I thought I was meeting a movie star in the making, but it turned out to be one of the most awkward and creepy experiences I've ever had. It's one of those stories that just makes you look back and think, how did I let that happen? James' profile seemed pretty solid. He claimed to be an aspiring actor with all the right professional headshots, clean, polished, looking like someone who could step off a movie set at any moment. His bio was full of dreamy stuff like chasing my dreams, one audition at a time, and life's a movie and I'm the lead. To top it off, he posted a bunch of photos from what looked like actual film sets. Some were with well-known actors and celebrities. Not the kind of thing you see every day on dating apps, right? So, I'll admit I was intrigued. I thought maybe this guy's got some stories to tell. Maybe he's legit. We chatted for a few days, and the conversation flowed easily. He seemed charming and a little mysterious, but mostly down to earth. We both liked similar movies, shared a love for spontaneous road trips, and he seemed, well, normal, at least in the texts. After a few back and forths, we decided to meet for drinks at a bar downtown that was trendy but not too over the top. He said he'd be there early. I felt pretty good about it, excited even. I mean, an aspiring actor. That sounded fun. What's a night out with someone like that going to be like? When I got to the bar, I immediately started scanning the crowd. And that's when I saw him walk in. I swear, for a second I thought I had the wrong place or maybe I was seeing things. The guy who walked in looked nothing like the guy in the pictures. He was short, maybe 5'7" at most. Definitely not the tall, athletic build his profile had suggested. His hair was a mess, scruffy and unkempt, and he had this exhausted, wore-out look about him. I don't know if it was just the lighting or if he had a rough day, but he didn't have that polished, starving artist energy that I was expecting. He didn't even have the same smile he had in his photos. It was like a whole other person walked in, someone who was tired of pretending. I stood there for a second, debating whether to go up to him. He caught my eye and smiled awkwardly, and I knew right away it was him. But I couldn't shake the weird feeling that hit me as soon as I saw him. I don't know if I expected some grand entrance, but this was definitely not what I imagined. We sat down and things started off fine. I mean, he was still pretty charming in an almost rehearsed way, but there was something off about his vibe. His stories didn't add up, and the more he talked, the more I realized that he was definitely not the person he portrayed online. He went on about how tough the industry has been on him, about how he had to reinvent himself. He told me that he had been trying to get cast in roles for years but hadn't had the break he was hoping for. I listened, but honestly, I was kind of confused. He didn't mention specific roles or projects, just a lot of vague terms about the industry. I tried to steer the conversation into more normal territory, but every time I did, he'd loop it back to his struggles as an aspiring actor. It felt more like a therapy session than a date, and then it got even stranger. He started asking me if I could help him get into the right circles. Like, seriously. He made it sound like my casual social media following or a few contacts I had could help him get his big break. He said something like, "If you know anyone in production, it could really help." It was honestly so weird. I didn't even know how to respond. I wasn't even sure what kind of help he was looking for, or why he thought I had those kinds of connections. I'm just a regular person who likes to go to bars on weekends, not a Hollywood Asian. I started to get uncomfortable. It felt like he was using me as some kind of stepping stone for his own ego or career. And the more he talked, the more I realized he was putting on this entire persona that didn't match up to who he really was. Like, he wanted me to see him as some struggling actor trying to make it, but the reality was that he was just some guy trying way too hard to impress people. The date was dragging on, and I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I started making excuses, saying I had an early morning meeting, which wasn't totally untrue, and wrapped things up quickly. As I left the bar, I couldn't help but feel like I'd been duped, not just by him, but by the entire situation. I blocked him the second I got home, just in case. But the weirdest part, the next day his profile was gone. Like, totally vanished. I didn't see it in my matches anymore, and even if I searched for him by name, nothing came up. It wasn't like he deleted his account and kept it inactive. His profile disappeared completely. It was like he never existed at all. Looking back, I'm not sure if he was just some guy who got caught up in a weird fantasy of being someone he wasn't, or if he had an ulterior motive. Maybe he was just hoping I'd be impressed by his fake persona, or maybe he was trying to scam someone. Whatever it was, it left me with this weird, unsettled feeling that I couldn't shake. I've met people from dating apps before, and yeah, they're not always exactly how they seem online, but this was on a whole new level of strange. I haven't been back on Hinge since then. Part of me wonders if he's still out there using different photos, trying to pretend to be someone else. And honestly, after that experience, I think I'll be a lot more cautious about who I trust online. It's weird how someone can create this version of themselves that's just not real. And when you finally meet them, you realize that it's all just smoke and mirrors. I don't know if James was just trying to impress me, or if he had some other motive, but I'm just glad I didn't get sucked into whatever his game was. Lesson learned, I guess. Just because someone looks good on paper doesn't mean they're the real deal. And sometimes people you meet online are more about playing a part than actually being themselves. So I was on Tinder, just swiping away like everyone else does, not really expecting anything too wild. I mean, most of the guys were either boring or just looking for something casual. But then I came across Eddie's profile. He seemed cool at first, good looking with a great smile and a couple of pics in cool places like the beach and some city spots. The bio was pretty standard, just trying to find something real into music, long walks, and traveling. I wasn't super sold on him, but he didn't seem like the typical here for a good time, not a long time type. We started chatting, and at first, everything was fine. Eddie was charming, like asterisk really asterisk charming. He told me he was a photographer and traveled around a lot for work. He seemed down to earth, like we could have been friends just talking about music and life. The conversation flowed easily, and we hit it off pretty quickly. He'd share cool stories about his shoots and talk about my job and stuff. But after a few days, things started feeling off. It started small, just weird comments here and there. Like, he'd say things like, "You're so beautiful, but I bet you don't get that much attention from guys." Or, "It's crazy that you're still single with your looks." At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just trying to compliment me, but the more he said stuff like that, the more it felt like he was trying to manipulate me in some way. Then one night, he asked if I wanted to move the conversation off Tinder and onto a more private app. He suggested WhatsApp, which I don't know seemed normal enough. I was a little hesitant, but after chatting for a while, I thought, what could go wrong? Big mistake. After we moved to WhatsApp, things started changing quickly. Eddie got more intense. He'd message me all the time, sometimes several times a day, telling me how much he missed talking to me, even though we just texted hours before. He'd send me pictures of his work, random photos from his travels, and even some videos. The weird thing was, the more he opened up, the less I felt like I knew him. He was always asterisk too perfect, asterisk too charming, like he was playing a role. But it wasn't until he started getting more personal that I began to get uneasy. One night, I was just chilling at home when he sent me a message out of the blue. It was random, but it seemed harmless enough. He said he had a surprise for me. I figured maybe he was going to share a funny video or something cute, but when I opened the message, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a video, it was a picture of me. An asterisk recent asterisk picture of me. The thing is, I didn't remember ever sending him this particular photo. It was one I'd posted on my Instagram a few weeks ago, but I hadn't shared it with anyone else. Not on Tinder, not on WhatsApp. It wasn't a private photo or anything, just one of me out with friends. But the fact that he had it made my blood run cold. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he'd just seen it on Instagram and saved it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I asked him how he got the picture, but he just laughed it off and said it didn't matter. That's when things started getting dark. The next day, Eddie hit me with a request. At first, it seemed like a joke, but the more he insisted, the more it felt wrong. He said he was having some financial issues and needed a bit of help. He didn't ask for a lot, just a few $100s. He told me it was to help him pay for a flight back home. I was taken aback. I had no idea why he'd be asking me for money, especially since I barely knew him. But then he started dropping these weird hints, telling me how much he trusted me and how he really needed me to help him out. He said he couldn't ask anyone else, that he didn't want to burden his family, and that he was too proud to ask his friends. That was when I started getting suspicious. I told him I couldn't help him out, which seemed to set him off. He started texting me more frequently, getting more urgent with his messages. He said I was being cold and selfish, and that I didn't understand how tough things had been for him. Then came the ultimatum. Eddie told me if I didn't send him the money, he'd make sure everyone saw that photo. He said he had more pictures, more private stuff. He was threatening to post it all, not just on his social media, but everywhere. He said he had friends who could make things go viral and ruin my reputation if I didn't comply. At that point, I was in complete shock. I didn't even know what to say. I was still trying to wrap my head around how this random guy I met on Tinder was blackmailing me. The more I tried to tell him I wasn't going to send him money, the more desperate and aggressive he became. It's crazy how quickly it escalated. He started telling me how much trouble I was in, and how I had no idea what kind of people he knew. He even said things like, "You don't want to see what happens when I don't get what I want." I felt trapped. My hands were shaking as I blocked him on WhatsApp and tried to delete my Tinder account, but the whole time, he was blowing up my phone with threatening messages. I was honestly scared. I had never experienced anything like this before, and I had no idea how to handle it. I didn't want to go to the police or make it worse, but at the same time, I knew I had to do something. So I talked to a few friends, and they told me I should report him. After a lot of back and forth with myself, I finally filed a report with the authorities. A week later, I found out Eddie's account was flagged on Tinder. I never heard from him again, but I'll never forget how I felt during that time. I didn't want to live in fear, and I knew I'd learned my lesson about trusting people online, but it was honestly the most messed up thing that's ever happened to me. I deleted my Tinder account for good after that. The whole experience left me with this constant unease whenever I think about online dating. Some people are just messed up, and you can't always see it coming. I don't know what Eddie's deal was or if he did this to other people, but I do know that I was lucky to get out of it. This is probably going to sound like one of those bad first date stories, but trust me when I say it was much more unsettling than that. I've used OkCupid for a while, just casually meeting new people, but nothing really prepared me for what happened with Chris. So, Chris and I matched on OkCupid, and he seemed pretty much like a dream guy. He was tall, successful, and, hit this, he was an attorney. I mean, who would be intrigued by that? He had a great job, was good looking, and from his profile, he seemed like he had it all together. We got into some pretty deep conversations about everything from books to life goals. It all felt very natural, and I was honestly excited when he suggested we meet up for drinks at a rooftop bar. I've always liked rooftop bars, so I agreed, thinking it would be a nice, low-key date. We settled on a place that had a pretty view of the skyline. The evening of our date arrived, and I was running a little late as usual, but when I walked into the bar, I saw him right away. He was sitting at a table near the railing, staring out over the city. He was easy to spot, tall, dark hair, and he had that confident lawyer vibe, or so I thought. But as I walked closer, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. His face didn't look the same as in his photos. It was a little more worn out, with deeper lines and an unkempt beard, and his clothes were a mess. He was wearing a wrinkled shirt that looked like it had been hastily pulled from a drawer, and his shoes. Well, let's just say they weren't the polished, professional kind I expected an attorney to wear. It wasn't like he looked bad, but it was definitely a stark contrast to the polished, successful man he had portrayed online. I took a deep breath, told myself it was probably nothing, and walked up to him. He smiled and waved, and I sat down, trying to shake off the weird feeling. He immediately said, "It's been a long day at work," as if it was supposed to explain everything. I nodded, not really sure what to say. It wasn't like I had any reason to doubt him yet, so I brushed it off. But as we started talking, that nagging feeling started to grow. He told me he was an attorney at a big law firm, but then when I asked him the name of the firm, he seemed to hesitate for a second too long. "It's a well-known one," he said. He didn't name it. Weird, right? I figured maybe he just didn't want to brag, but then it started getting even stranger. I mentioned something about how I always found the law fascinating, and I made a passing comment about a specific legal term I'd read about recently. He looked at me like I had just spoken another language. I smiled awkwardly, thinking I might have gone off on a tangent, but then he said something even stranger. He didn't know the term at all. I tried not to let it show on my face, but it was obvious to me that he wasn't actually a lawyer. He didn't even seem to know basic legal jargon. And that's when it hit me. He wasn't just messing up a few details, he was lying. I tried to stay calm, thinking that maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe he was just nervous, or maybe I was overthinking things. But the more we talked, the more it became clear that he was living some kind of fantasy life. At one point, he started telling me these bizarre, overly dramatic stories about his cases. The details didn't make any sense, and every time I tried to ask about specifics, he would give vague answers or change the subject. He told me a story about winning a huge case involving some high-profile company, but when I asked what company it was, he couldn't even name it. That was the moment I knew for sure. He wasn't a lawyer. I didn't know what to do. I kept trying to find a way to make the conversation feel normal again, but I could barely focus on what he was saying. I felt like I was sitting across from someone pretending to be someone they weren't. Someone trying so hard to convince me of a life that wasn't theirs. And honestly, it was unsettling. It was like I had walked into some weird social experiment. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't about to sit there and pretend everything was fine. So I decided to cut the date short. I made an excuse about being tired, and I left as quickly as I could without saying goodbye properly. I didn't even look back as I walked out of the bar. When I got home, I immediately blocked him out of Cupid. It was late by then, and I was kind of shaken up by the whole thing. I mean, it was just a date, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just encountered something much stranger than I had bargained for. The next morning, I checked my phone again to see if I'd gotten any new messages. What I didn't expect was that his profile had disappeared, just gone, like it was never even there. I know profiles can disappear for a lot of reasons. People can delete or deactivate them, or sometimes apps have glitches, but I was pretty sure he had deleted it. I felt a weird mix of relief and confusion. It was like the whole thing never happened. That was a couple of months ago now, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I still have no idea why he did it or what his deal was. I mean, why would someone go through all that trouble to pretend to be someone they weren't? And why target me of all people? It honestly felt like he was living some twisted fantasy, and I had been part of it for one night. I haven't gone back on Cupid since. Honestly, I don't think I could bring myself to. I'm not sure if it was just a strange coincidence or if something darker was at play. Either way, I'm not eager to find out. I'm not sure I'll ever fully trust dating apps again. It's a weird world, and sometimes things aren't what they seem. But hey, at least I didn't have to meet the real Chris, whatever that was. I've been on a lot of dates through Hinge, some good, some meh, but nothing really compares to the one with James. I thought I was meeting a movie star in the making, but it turned out to be one of the most awkward and creepy experiences I've ever had. It's one of those stories that just makes you look back and think, how did I let that happen? James' profile seemed pretty solid. He claimed to be an aspiring actor with all the right professional headshots. Clean, polished, looking like someone who could step off a movie set at any moment. His bio was full of dreamy stuff like chasing my dreams, one audition at a time, and life's a movie, I'm the lead. To top it off, he posted a bunch of photos from what looked like actual film sets. Some were with well-known actors and celebrities. Not the kind of thing you see every day on dating apps, right? So I'll admit I was intrigued. I thought maybe this guy's got some stories to tell. Maybe he's legit. We chatted for a few days and the conversation flowed easily. He seemed charming, a little mysterious, but mostly down to earth. We both liked similar movies, shared a love for spontaneous road trips, and he seemed, well, normal, at least in the texts. After a few back and forths, we decided to meet for drinks at a bar downtown that was trendy but not too over the top. He said he'd be there early. I felt pretty good about it, excited even. I mean, an aspiring actor. That sounded fun. What's a night out with someone like that going to be like? When I got to the bar, I immediately started scanning the crowd, and that's when I saw him walk in. I swear, for a second I thought I had the wrong place, or maybe I was seeing things. The guy who walked in looked nothing like the guy in the pictures. He was short, maybe 5'7" at most, definitely not the tall, athletic build his profile had suggested. His hair was a mess, scruffy and unkempt, and he had this exhausted, worn-out look about him. I don't know if it was just the lighting or if he had a rough day, but he didn't have that polished, starving artist energy that I was expecting. He didn't even have the same smile he had in his photos. It was like a whole other person walked in, someone who was tired of pretending. I stood there for a second, debating whether to go up to him. He caught my eye and smiled awkwardly. I knew right away it was him. But I couldn't shake the weird feeling that hit me as soon as I saw him. I don't know if I expected some grand entrance, but this was definitely not what I imagined. We sat down, and things started off fine. I mean, he was still pretty charming in an almost rehearsed way, but there was something off about his vibe. His stories didn't add up, and the more he talked, the more I realized that he was definitely not the person he portrayed online. He went on about how tough the industry has been on him, about how he had to reinvent himself. He told me that he had been trying to get cast in roles for years, but hadn't had the break he was hoping for. I listened, but honestly, I was kind of confused. He didn't mention specific roles or projects, just a lot of vague terms about the industry. I tried to steer the conversation into more normal territory, but every time I did, he'd loop it back to his struggles as an aspiring actor. It felt more like a therapy session than a date, and then it got even stranger. He started asking me if I could help him get into the right circles. Like, seriously, he made it sound like my casual social media following or a few contacts I had could help him get his big break. He said something like, if you know anyone in production, it could really help. It was honestly so weird. I didn't even know how to respond. I wasn't even sure what kind of help he was looking for, or why he thought I had those kinds of connections. I'm just a regular person who likes to go to bars on weekends, not a Hollywood agent. I started to get uncomfortable. It felt like he was using me as some kind of stepping stone for his own ego or career, and the more he talked, the more I realized he was putting on this entire persona that didn't match up to who he really was. Like he wanted me to see him as some struggling actor trying to make it, but the reality was that he was just some guy trying way too hard to impress people. The date was dragging on, and I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I started making excuses, saying I had an early morning meeting, which wasn't totally untrue, and wrapped things up quickly. As I left the bar, I couldn't help but feel like I'd been duped, not just by him, but by the entire situation. I blocked him the second I got home, just in case. But the weirdest part, the next day his profile was gone, like totally vanished. I didn't see it in my matches anymore, and even if I searched for him by name, nothing came up. It wasn't like he deleted his account and kept it inactive. His profile disappeared completely. It was like he never existed at all. Looking back, I'm not sure if he was just some guy who got caught up in a weird fantasy of being someone he wasn't, or if he had an ulterior motive. Maybe he was just hoping I'd be impressed by his fake persona, or maybe he was trying to scam someone. Whatever it was, it left me with this weird, unsettled feeling that I couldn't shake. I've met people from dating apps before, and yeah, they're not always exactly how they seem online, but this was on a whole new level of strange. I haven't been back on Hinge since then. Part of me wonders if he's still out there using different photos, trying to pretend to be someone else. And honestly, after that experience, I think I'll be a lot more cautious about who I trust online. It's weird how someone can create this version of themselves that's just not real. And when you finally meet them, you realize that it's all just smoke and mirrors. I don't know if James was just trying to impress me, or if he had some other motive, but I'm just glad I didn't get sucked into whatever his game was. Lesson learned, I guess. Just because someone looks good on paper doesn't mean they're the real deal. And sometimes people you meet online are more about playing a part than actually being themselves. I never thought my first date on Moose Match would turn into something that still gives me chills every time I think about it. I have been using the app for a couple of months, just trying to meet someone who shared the same values and beliefs as me. I was raised with strong family traditions and faith, so naturally, I was looking for someone who respected that. I thought Moose Match would be the perfect platform to find a connection that was grounded in mutual respect, religion, and shared goals for the future. So when I matched with Ailey, everything seemed to check out. His profile looked great, and his bio was very much in line with what I was looking for: family oriented, devout, and someone who valued his faith. We chatted for a bit, and he seemed genuinely nice. We shared some similar interests, like our love for family gatherings and a good cup of chai tea. I wasn't in a rush, but after a few weeks of messaging back and forth, we decided to meet for coffee. I was cautiously optimistic. We agreed on a popular coffee shop in town, a casual but nice spot with a cozy vibe. When I got there, I was a little nervous but mostly excited. I mean, this was the kind of guy I was hoping to meet. I saw him sitting by the window, looking down at his phone. I could immediately tell he was the person in his pictures. He had a friendly smile and a warm energy, so I felt a little relief. It wasn't awkward at first, and we fell into easy conversation. At first, everything was fine. We chatted about family, how our faith shaped our lives, and our hopes for the future. He was engaging, respectful, and seemed really invested in getting to know me. But as the conversation progressed, I started to notice something wasn't quite right. It wasn't that he was rude or disrespectful. No, it was subtler than that. It was like a little voice in my head was telling me something's off. I couldn't put my finger on it yet, but it kept nagging at me. As we continued talking, the topic shifted to food. I casually mentioned how much I loved halal food, how it reminded me of home, and how important it was to me that I only eat halal meat. I thought it was just a small conversation about food, nothing big, but his reaction caught me off guard. Instead of the usual response of, "Yeah, I get that," or even a casual acknowledgement, he gave me this strange look. It wasn't judgmental, but it wasn't warm either. He sort of froze for a second, then tried to smile it off. But then he started to press the issue. He asked if I ever tried non-halal food, particularly pork. I thought maybe he was just curious, so I mentioned that I had never eaten pork and wasn't planning to, as it was against my beliefs. But then he said something that made me feel uncomfortable. He casually suggested, "What's the harm in trying it, though? I mean, it's just food, right?" It caught me off guard. I didn't expect this kind of conversation, especially not with someone who seemed to share the same religious values as me. Remember, I'm Muslim, so this is against my religion. But I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was a one-off comment. But as the conversation went on, he kept bringing it up. It was subtle at first, talking about how he had eaten pork before and didn't see it as a big deal. But then it started becoming more insistent. "Don't you think you're limiting yourself?" he asked, his voice not exactly judgmental but more persuasive. "It's just one thing. You don't know what you're missing." I was starting to get uncomfortable. He wasn't just asking out of curiosity anymore. He was trying to convince me, like he was on a mission to break some kind of barrier. I didn't want to make a scene, but I could feel the tension building. I gave short answers, trying to steer the conversation back to something more neutral, but it didn't work. He asked, "Wouldn't you be more open-minded if you tried it just once?" I'm not saying you have to eat it all the time, but just once for the experience. It could open your mind. I could tell this wasn't just some random topic. He was really invested in it, and the longer he pushed, the more uneasy I felt. I tried to laugh it off. I made a comment about how I respected my faith and my upbringing too much to compromise on something so important, but he wouldn't drop it. The more I tried to end the conversation, the more he persisted. He even mentioned how he had grown past his earlier restrictions, implying that maybe I should do the same. I started to get a sinking feeling in my stomach. This wasn't about food anymore. It wasn't even about faith. It felt like he was testing me, like he was trying to break me down, to challenge the very core of who I was. I felt my stomach twist with anxiety. I didn't know what he was after, but I knew I didn't want to be a part of it. At this point, I'd had enough. I politely excused myself and said I had to go. I could see the look on his face, almost like he was disappointed, but also strangely satisfied. It was a mix of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. I left the coffee shop, still feeling unsettled. The next few days, I didn't hear from him, which I thought was good. But then his messages started coming. They were subtle at first, just casual check-ins. But the tone shifted again. He kept asking about my food preferences, kept hinting at trying new things. It was like he was trying to wear me down. I blocked him after the third message, feeling a little shaken. I'd had enough. It wasn't just his obsession with pork. It was his disregard for my beliefs, for who I was, and his insistence on pushing boundaries I wasn't willing to cross. And it wasn't just that. It was a feeling that something wasn't right, that he had ulterior motives. I don't know what he was hoping to accomplish, but I knew one thing for sure. I'd never be so quick to trust someone again, especially when they seemed to have an agenda. The whole situation left me questioning not just him, but the app, and whether it was the right space to meet people who truly understood and respected my values. To this day, I still can't shake the weirdness of it all. It wasn't just the food. It was the way he tried to manipulate me into doing something I wasn't comfortable with. The way he made me question myself and my beliefs for a moment. I'm just glad I got what I did. I'll never forget the day I realized the person I thought I was going on a date with was actually a complete stranger, someone pretending to be someone else. It all started with a match on Bumble, and at first, everything seemed normal. But trust me, I could never have predicted how everything would spiral from there. Her name was Annie. She had one of those profiles that just drew you in. Pretty smile, cute hobbies, a love for indie movies, and to top it off, she seemed genuine and funny in her messages. We swapped memes, talked about movies, and shared random thoughts. Nothing too deep, nothing too weird, but everything felt right. She had this chill vibe about her, and it seemed like we were on the same wavelength. After a few days of chatting, I was really excited to meet her in person. We decided to meet at a cafe that was quiet and had a nice outdoor patio. It was the kind of place you go if you just wanted to hang out and talk. I had a feeling it would be a nice, low-pressure first date, and was looking forward to it. The day of the date, I was a bit nervous. Who isn't when they're meeting someone new? But overall, I felt good about it. I wasn't expecting anything crazy. I just hoped it would be a fun way to spend an afternoon. When I arrived at the cafe, I texted her that I was outside. I sat at the table, my nerves slowly fading as I looked at my phone, refreshing the messages. But then, as the minutes ticked by, I started to feel a little off. I kept looking around, waiting for Annie to show up. It wasn't like her to be late. She'd mentioned she was already on her way, and her last message had been just minutes ago. Eventually, I saw a woman walking across the patio. She was wearing a hoodie, her face partially hidden behind her phone, and she looked, well, nothing like Annie's photos. I stood up, thinking maybe I was mistaken, but when she looked up, I immediately recognized the familiar face from her profile picture. It was Annie, sort of. I waved, feeling a little awkward. She smiled and came over, sitting down across from me. I'm not going to lie. The first thing I noticed was how much older she looked in person, like a good 10 years older than in her pictures. The smile was still the same, but there was something about her that didn't match the confident, polished vibe I'd gotten online. She looked tired, disheveled maybe. I could tell right away that this wasn't the Annie I had been talking to for the past few days. I shrugged it off. Sometimes people look different in real life, right? We started talking, and honestly, at first, things weren't too bad. She was still friendly, but there was this weird vibe in the air. It was like she was trying a little too hard to maintain the same energy she had in the messages. I noticed she was acting a little distant, and she was drinking her coffee a bit too fast, almost like she was nervous. I asked her if she'd had a good week, but instead of answering with something normal, she gave me this strange smile and just kept nodding. Then the conversation took a weird turn. She started talking about her life, and the more she talked, the more it didn't make sense. She said she worked in graphic design, but when I asked about her projects, she couldn't name any recent ones. She said she loved indie films, but couldn't recall the last one she'd seen. Every question I asked seemed to get a vague answer, or she would quickly change the subject. It was like she was dodging everything that didn't fit into the story she had in her head. The whole thing fell off, and it only got worse from there. After a while, I just couldn't ignore it anymore. There was something about her that seemed like a completely different person than the one I'd been chatting with online. I started feeling like I was being trolled, like maybe this was some prank. But it wasn't until she mentioned something that completely freaked me out that I realized what was going on. She casually said, I just love pretending to be different people. It's kind of a hobby of mine. You'd be surprised how much you can get away with online. I didn't really know how to respond to that. I laughed it off, thinking she was just being weird. But deep down, I felt a pit in my stomach. And then she said something that made everything click. She told me, "It's funny. You probably never even suspected, did you? You really thought you were talking to someone named Annie, huh? Bet you didn't know that Annie's just a character. It's me, Jake." And that was when it hit me. Jake. The person I had been talking to all this time wasn't even a woman. It was a guy pretending to be someone else, using fake photos, fake stories, everything. I felt like the world around me was spinning for a second. I couldn't even process what was happening. I felt humiliated, angry, confused, but mostly just disturbed. I looked around the cafe, wondering if anyone else had overheard. I mean, who does that? Who goes through all the effort to create a fake identity on a dating app just to mess with someone like that? This guy wasn't just trolling me for fun. It felt like he was toying with my emotions, pretending to be someone I could trust, and then pulling the rug out from under me in the most bizarre way possible. I didn't know how to react. I wanted to get up and leave right then and there, but I couldn't even look at him anymore. I just stared at the table, trying to keep it together. After a few moments of awkward silence, he stood up, told me he had to leave, and casually walked out of the cafe as if nothing had happened. I was left there, sitting in a pool of confusion and embarrassment, feeling like an absolute fool. I couldn't even process it properly. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or was he just having a laugh at my expense? I didn't care to find out. The moment I left the cafe, I blocked him on every platform. I wanted nothing to do with this person who had wasted my time, violated my trust, and made me question everything I knew about online dating. It wasn't until I got home and looked back at the photos on his profile that I realized just how carefully he had crafted his whole Annie persona. He used stock images from the internet, photos of women who weren't even him. It felt like an elaborate prank, and I was a punchline. I never went back to Muzmaj after that. The whole thing just left me so disillusioned. I've heard stories of people using fake identities online, but I never thought I'd fall for it. I never thought someone would be that low. To this day, I still get a little creeped out thinking about it. It wasn't just the fact that I was tricked, it was the whole idea that someone out there thought it was funny to mess with me like that. It's a lesson I'll never forget. Online dating can be fun, but it can also be the perfect place for people to hide behind masks, pretending to be whoever they want. And sometimes those masks aren't just funny, they're downright disturbing. I'm sure you've heard people talk about how dating apps can be full of fake profiles, but I always thought, hey, maybe I'll get lucky. I wasn't expecting much, but I figured if it didn't work out, at least I have a good story to tell. And that's exactly what I got, a story, a creepy one. I matched with Leo on Tinder. His profile immediately caught my eye. The guy had pictures from all over the world, Paris, Tokyo, and Maldives. Honestly, it was like a dream come true. I always wanted someone who had an adventurous side, someone who could keep up with my wanderlust. He was always traveling for work, he said, and even though he mentioned that he was constantly busy, he was still looking for someone to settle down with. It sounded perfect, right? Our conversation started off normal. We talked about travel, the usual stuff. But the more we talked, the more he'd throw in details about his life, his business ventures, and how he was a big deal in the startup world. He claimed he was working on a project that would make him millions. For someone who was always globetrotting, he didn't come across as the kind of person who was just trying to look rich. It seemed like he actually had something going for him. At least that's what I thought. After a few days of chatting, we agreed to meet up at a wine bar downtown. I was excited. I'd been on a few dates here and there, but this one felt like it had potential. I figured this could be something real. Maybe I was being too optimistic, but I honestly thought I was about to meet someone cool. When I walked into the bar and saw him sitting at the table, my heart dropped a little. It wasn't like I was expecting a model or anything, but the person sitting there looked nothing like his photos. The guy in front of me was heavier, his hair was greasy, and his clothes didn't match the polished look he had in his pictures. He was wearing a button-down shirt that was clearly too big for him and didn't look like something a world traveler would wear. I thought maybe it was just a bad day for him, but something felt off. As we started talking, it didn't take long for me to notice that something wasn't adding up. Leo began talking about his business ventures, which was basically the same story he told me online. He claimed he had a startup that was going to change the world and make him millions. He said he was waiting for a big deal to go through that would set him up for life. Okay, that sounded promising, right? Except when I tried to ask more about the business, like what it was or what kind of product he was selling, his answers were always vague. He'd tell me he couldn't go into too much detail or that it was all top secret. I wasn't buying it. Every time I asked a follow-up question, his answers got more and more generic. He'd say things like, "It's a tech thing," or "It's in the early stages, but I've got investors lined up." He was clearly avoiding giving me real information, and I started to feel like I was talking to someone who had no idea what they were saying. As the night went on, it felt like the gap between what I thought I was getting and the reality of the situation grew wider. The stories kept changing, and I was getting more and more uncomfortable. He would mention big meetings with investors but couldn't name a single one. He said he'd been living in different countries but didn't seem to know much about any of the places he supposedly loved so much. I started asking myself, who was this guy really, and why was he so desperate to impress me? The final straw came when he tried to talk about how he was reinventing himself. He said that he'd been successful in the past, but things hadn't gone the way he'd hoped, and now he was trying to get back on track. It just sounded like a bunch of excuses. Everything was vague. He kept talking about how he had big plans, but never once mentioned what those plans were. He didn't even have a job title. By the end of the night, I could tell that I wasn't dealing with a successful entrepreneur or an adventurer. I was dealing with someone who was pretending to be something they weren't, probably to impress people. And maybe it was the wine talking that I was done. I didn't want to make a scene, so I kept it polite and ended the day early. I walked out of that bar feeling stupid, like I just wasted a whole evening with someone who was living off a fantasy. When I got home, I immediately blocked him on Tinder. I was just relieved to be done with the whole thing. But what happened next really freaked me out. The next day, I went to check my Tinder account to make sure I hadn't left anything hanging with him, and his profile was gone. Completely gone. I thought maybe he just deleted it, but then I did a quick search at his name. Nothing. It was like he vanished into thin air. At first, I thought maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe he was just some guy who was trying to make himself look better than he was. But then I started getting weird notifications from the other dating apps I was using, like random likes or matches from accounts that seemed way too generic. Like they were just there to keep me distracted. It creeped me out. I deleted everything. Tinder, the other apps, everything. I wasn't about to risk running into that guy again. Looking back, I don't know what exactly Leo was trying to do. Maybe he was just lonely, or maybe he was so caught up in his own fantasy that he thought he could sell me on it. Either way, I learned my lesson. Don't trust everything you see on dating apps, and definitely don't assume someone's life is as glamorous as it seems. So there's this one time I matched with a guy named Joe on eHarmony. You know how people always talk about how amazing eHarmony is supposed to be, how it's for serious relationships and long-term commitments. Well, I thought I'd give it a shot. I wasn't looking for anything crazy at the time, just someone decent. Someone who didn't have their whole life upended by random hookups or drama. I thought eHarmony was my best bet for that. When Joe and I first started talking, it was fine. Nothing too special, but he seemed decent. His profile was one of those down-to-earth, looking for someone real types. I liked his honesty. He talked about being into books, hiking, and the usual "I'm a hard worker, but I also love to relax on the weekends" stuff. No red flags, no warning signs. But after a few days of chatting, things started to feel off. He began sending messages that were slowly getting more critical. At first, it was just low comments about how I sounded like I'd never been outside the city, which, okay, sure, I wasn't a huge outdoorsy person. Fine. But it didn't stop there. He started bringing up how I didn't seem very ambitious and must be okay with just average things. I tried brushing it off, thinking maybe he was just in a bad mood or having a rough day. But every time I'd share something, he'd find a way to twist it. I told him I liked going to concerts and live shows, and he made it sound like that was such a waste of time. I mentioned a book I was reading, and he acted like I was wasting my life on stupid fiction and should be reading something more practical. At that point, I started wondering if this guy had some weird obsession with criticizing everything I liked. The whole thing was kind of like walking on eggshells. Whenever I'd say something, I could already predict what he was going to say back. Nothing was good enough, nothing was impressive enough. I tried to stay polite, not to snap back. Maybe it was just a phase, I thought. Maybe he was testing me to see how much I could handle. But nope, it only got worse. After a few more days of this weird negative energy, I suggested we meet up. I figured, okay, maybe face to face will help clear things up. We picked a coffee shop downtown. Nothing fancy, just a casual place where we could chat and get to know each other better. The entire time I was on my way there, I started feeling this gut feeling like maybe I was walking into a disaster. But I shrugged it off, telling myself I was just overthinking. When I met Joe in person, I'll be honest, he wasn't what I expected at all. Not that looks matter all that much, but he looked tired, like physically tired, with deep bags under his eyes. He was dressed okay, but nothing like the profile picture he had posted. It wasn't a huge deal at first, but it was definitely a shift. It felt like he was trying too hard to be someone else. We sat down and started talking, and almost immediately the negativity came rushing out. Joe kept talking about how everyone's so lazy these days and how people like me don't really get how hard life can be. It was like suddenly he was the world's greatest expert on everything and I was some kind of ignorant kid. Every sentence was an insult wrapped in some fake sympathy. I wasn't even sure what to do or say at that point. Do I try to defend myself? Or just sit there and take it? I tried bringing the conversation back to neutral ground. I asked him about his work, his family, his hobbies, things I thought would get him talking about himself in a more positive way. But nope. Everything I said, he turned into something negative. When I asked about his job, he complained about how unappreciated he was, how nobody at work had any ambition. I didn't want to get too deep into it, but it felt like he was projecting all his frustration onto me. Every question was like an invitation for him to unleash more bitterness. At one point, I tried to explain how I like to stay positive and not focus on all the bad stuff. I told him that I thought focusing on the good things helped keep my head on straight. Well, that didn't sit well with him at all. He told me it was ridiculous to ignore reality and that pretending things are fine was a way of avoiding responsibility. I was honestly starting to feel like I was talking to someone who wasn't even interested in getting to know me. It felt more like he was interested in belittling me and pushing me down until I agreed with his miserable view of life. And then the worst part, he kept talking about his failures. Over and over, he mentioned how no one ever understood him and how everything he tried just fell apart. By this point, I felt like I was being emotionally drained by a complete stranger who seemed hell-bent on making me feel bad about myself. I couldn't understand what kind of person would act like this, especially on a first date. I started looking around the coffee shop, wishing I could just leave, but I didn't want to be rude. I'd already wasted so much time there, I wasn't going to let it drag on any longer. I finished my drink quickly and tried to wrap things up. He didn't seem to notice that I was done. He just kept talking, almost as if he was completely unaware that I wasn't engaged anymore. When I finally got up to leave, I felt this weird sense of relief. It was like I had been released from a bad situation. But the moment I stepped outside, I felt completely drained. When I got home, I blocked him on eHarmony immediately. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe that I could just forget about it. But something about that date stuck with me. I kept replaying the whole conversation over and over in my head. What was the point of it? What did he want from me? And why was he so hell-bent on being so negative? It wasn't just a constant criticism. It was the fact that he wasn't even interested in getting to know me. The whole date felt like an emotional attack, like I had been his punching bag for an hour. I couldn't stop thinking about how drained I felt, how this guy had somehow made me feel like everything I'd been working toward was pointless. I never heard from Joe again, and his profile disappeared not long after. I didn't care. In fact, I was relieved. Honestly, that was probably the most bizarre and uncomfortable date I've ever been on. Some people are just bitter, I guess. I wasn't about to try and fix that.